With the start of the regular season just a little over a week away, the Seahawks are continuing to churn their practice squad, particularly on the defensive side of the football. We're going to break down a quartet of additions made in the last 24 hours here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined by my co-host Nick Lee here on Blue Friday. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening down in Sacramento, California, or across the country and I can't pronounce this name that I had down here, actually. So we're just going to go with the nearby. You're in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I actually do not know how to pronounce this city that I grew up near. Anyway, if you're in Northern Indiana and you're listening to the show, we greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. It's almost a weekend, so of course there's going to be a few slip-ups by Nick and I. But anyway, we are drawing closer to the start of the regular season, which means it is almost time to start diving into our first opponent, our first game week. Before we can do that, though, we got to have our season predictions. We'll be doing that on offense and defense. Plus, we'll be checking out the latest practice squad additions as well on a jam-packed Blue Friday episode. Without further ado, now for your lead story here on our latest Locked On Seahawks installment. Seattle has been known over the years for churning their practice squad. It never stays stable throughout the course of the season, especially right after the initial 53-man roster. We've already seen a flurry of moves the last few days, Nick, but in particular, the Seahawks seem to be bracing for some of the injuries they are dealing with on the defensive side of the football. We don't know if Geno Smith is going to be ready in week one or when he's going to be able to get back from a sprained knee. Artie Burns is dealing with a toe issue. So not surprisingly, the Seahawks have added reinforcements at both the edge position as well as cornerback, signing 4 players, with the most notable one being one that we broke down yesterday, Tyus Bowser, former Baltimore Raven that played for Mike Macdonald for several years in Baltimore, joining the Seahawks practice squad after not playing in any games last season. This feels like a reclamation project the Seahawks are trying to take on that in the end could have some big contributions coming for them down the line if he's able to stay healthy and rediscover his prior form.
Yeah, I mean, with a coach that he's familiar with, of course, put together a 7-sack season in 2021, but never quite lived up to, the top 50 pick billing that he had. And, with Macdonald, the familiarity is there, so perhaps Macdonald sees something that he can work with there. And obviously, he has lots of film, lots of tape, and lots of experience with Bowser, the person, Bowser, the player. So also it feels really fun to just say Bowser. Bowser's on the Seahawks.
But I wonder if they're paying him in coins.
Yeah, lots of coins, hopefully. He's been a good pass rushing linebacker when he's been healthy and on the field. 40 pressures in 2021. Certainly, a hedge for, health there at the edge rusher position to Geno Smith, certainly a question mark at this point. So you like that he's brought in a guy who he's familiar with, that he can work with. I know that the breakup with Bowser and the Ravens was a bit messy with that. It said that injury suit that went through with the non-football injury list payment, but sounds like that's water on the bridge between him and Mike Macdonald at least. So that'll be a nice hedge to have. So certainly it's always nice to stash a guy on your practice squad that has NFL experience and certainly an experience with your current head coach.
And that was not the only edge defender that the Seahawks brought in. A former Seahawk, actually a 5th-round pick by the Seahawks back in 2022. Tyreke Smith is returning to the organization after spending the end of last year and training camp this August with the division rival Arizona Cardinals. Now, this was reported a few days ago, right after 53-man roster cut downs had happened and the waiver wire had cleared, that Tyreke Smith was going to be coming back to Seattle. Initially, he was not on their 15-man practice squad, but since then he has been added. And Nick, we were always intrigued by Tyreke Smith, and 2 years ago in the preseason, he had 15 tackles, he had a sack, had 4 pressures. So he showed a little bit coming off of a lost rookie season, then he missed with a hip injury, and it wasn't enough for him, though, to make the team. He played in 1 game against the Detroit Lions, and then he was on the practice squad for most of the season until Arizona came calling and signed him off of Seattle's practice squad. So the Seahawks didn't make the choice to get rid of him necessarily. It's that he was on the practice squad, and that's always the risk you take. Other teams can sign any of those players to their active roster if the player agrees to do so. And so now they're going to get a second look at a player who they're very familiar with. And quite frankly, I think Tyreke Smith is a really good fit for this hybrid 3-4 that Mike Macdonald is running.
Yeah, you can't have too many of those guys that are familiar with that system that can be versatile. And then, of course, the two cornerbacks as well. So you got Tyreke Smith and I'm blanking on Bowser along the edge. Then you got two corners now with Josh Jobe and Faion Hicks. Just with the Hicks signing, he's not really he hasn't really recorded many official stats as a defender. Lots of special teams action. Denver released him last year and spent most of last season with New Orleans on the practice squad, bouncing around with the Cleveland Browns. And certainly a guy that he has just looking at his draft profile on the smaller side as far as a corner that you'd like, but has some explosive athletic traits. Seems like a guy who could maybe carve a role out for himself on special teams, which he's been kind of trying to do recently. So obviously with some back end depth chart injuries along the cornerback position, you got two more guys coming in.
Yeah, the interesting thing with Hicks is that he played quite a bit of slot at Wisconsin, and he's had near a 50-50 split in his 3 NFL preseasons. He's never played a regular season defensive snap in the league, but in the preseason the last 3 years with the Broncos, Saints, and Browns, he's played almost 100 snaps in the slot. And at his size, 5'10", almost under 190 pounds, that would seem like the ideal place to put him, especially with his athletic metrics. And Artie Burns is dealing with a toe injury that John Schneider said he re-aggravated in practice a couple days ago. So there are some questions on whether or not he is going to be ready to play. Is this going to be something that's going to nag him for a large chunk of the season? And they don't have much slot depth. They released DJ James, their 6th-round pick, and they didn't bring him back on the practice squad. James actually worked out for the Giants yesterday. So they seem to have decided they're going to move on from the draft pick. They don't have a lot of depth at that slot cornerback position. So I think that Hicks is certainly a player to keep an eye on in preseason action, at least. Very mixed bag. He's given up 2 touchdowns, has had a pressure as a blitzer, no pass breakups, but he's been pretty sound as a tackler, and it is a guy that has played some outside and inside at the cornerback position. As for Josh Jobe, the former Alabama cornerback that the Eagles drafted late in the draft a couple years ago, he actually started 3 games for the Eagles last season, but it was a struggle and a half for him. He gave up 3 touchdowns in coverage, had some issues with missed tackles. He has almost exclusively played on the outside, and looking at his athletic traits, I expect that he is more of a boundary depth guy. They didn't really have that on their practice squad, aside from if you still wanted Artie Burns to play that position, and he's been playing more of the slot up to this point. So it looks like the Seahawks are trying to bring in somebody that they felt was a little better than, say, Lance Boykin or some of the other players that were on the training camp roster here last month that they can continue to develop. And Jobe is still a fairly young player that's got some physicality, can play that press coverage that Mike Macdonald likes on the outside. So this looks to be more of a developmental depth thing rather than a cushion for injuries, like I think that Faion Hicks is at this point at the slot corner position.
Right, and these two are pretty opposite as far as physical traits. You got Jobe, who's 6'1" and 32 and 5/8 inch arms, pretty long. 77th percentile for length, and fairly sizable corner. Yeah, like you mentioned, he learned his physicality and fearlessness at Alabama. Made some plays there and on defense and on special teams. In those really, really good Alabama teams in the early 2020 decade, which is weird to say that now. We're almost halfway through that decade. Anyway, so yeah, Josh Jobe, certainly a guy that fits the physical profile of more of an outside corner that you could stash away, develop, and God forbid that there's a call up needed with injuries to your other star corners, your other corners that kind of fit that more of a build on the outside. Josh Jobe also has some of that NFL experience that's pretty coveted, especially guys that you stash on the practice squad.
Both these guys could be players that get elevations depending on injuries, and obviously they can play some special teams. So those are always good additions to make. In fact, I would say all 4 of these players, Tyreke Smith can play some special teams too. Tyus Bowser historically has done some of that in Baltimore. So all these guys have a chance to get elevated at some point. I would say that Bowser's more of that hedge. You might need to be on the roster at some point because he has played in Mike Macdonald's defense. But these are certainly good additions. They're players that are going to be upgrades over some of the guys the Seahawks had that they cut, that they could have brought back for the practice squad. So from an experience standpoint, at least, 3 of these players have played some regular season snaps, Bowser being clearly the most experienced, the most proven player of these 4, but it gives the Seahawks a chance to develop some younger guys and also have some hedges if there's some injuries that crop up later in the season. Up next, hey, we've got week 1 coming up next week, Seahawks Broncos. Before we get there, as we like to do every Blue Friday before the start of the regular season, it's prediction time. It's time to peer into our crystal ball, and we're going to start on the offensive side of the football, who we expect to shine for the Seahawks in 2024. That'll be coming up next here on our latest Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Want to get in shape but have trouble getting motivated? Make 5-Hour Energy shots part of your lifestyle and get the energy boost you need to get fit. We all know you sometimes do not want to go to the gym. Take a 5-Hour Energy shot to give you the feeling and alertness so that you can get to the gym. 5-Hour Energy is the brand hardworking people like you have trusted for over 20 years to give them the alert, energized feeling they need to get through a busy, hectic day. You always know where to find 5-Hour Energy shots right at the cash register at nearly every convenience drug and grocery store nationwide. Stock up on money-saving multi-packs to make sure you never run out of delicious, energizing 5-Hour Energy shots. If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5-Hour Energy products today. You can use the promo code LOCKEDONFB to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order. It cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription offers. Energy.com. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, here on Blue Friday by my co-host, Nick Lee. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in out there. And as always, thanks for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. We are nearly 1 week away from opening kickoff of the 2024 season when the Broncos come to town to face the Seahawks. And Nick, as we like to do each and every year on the final Blue Friday before the regular season, it's time for our definitive predictions, what we think is going to happen for the Seahawks in 2024. We're going to peer into the crystal ball, mostly individual players, but maybe some team predictions thrown in there as well. And we are going to be making some predictions on both sides of the ball. We're going to start on the offensive side. And as I always do, I'm going to end up giving you the mic here first. And I'm assuming that you're probably going to start at the most important position in sports when you are making your first offensive prediction here.
Not only am I going to start with quarterbacks, I'm going to start with one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the NFL the last 2 years, Geno Smith. I'm going to go with a touchdown prediction. I think he can get back to the 30 touchdown mark that he had in 2022. I was a little tempered about that prediction earlier in the offseason, and then I saw 5 plays in the preseason, and I was all in. You know, I'm like George Costanza. Every time I think I'm out, they pull me back in. And Geno Smith, I'm back in with the 30 touchdowns. So obviously, we've talked about this all offseason. The Ryan Grubb system upgrade, the hopefully offensive line, even if it's marginally better. You got the weapons for days at the receiver position and the tight end position. So just an overall, kind of the rising tide raises all ships kind of scenario where I think Geno Smith can rebound and get back to the 30 touchdown mark. So it's not like it's not something he hasn't done before. His comeback player of the year campaign in 2022, he had those 30 touchdowns. And so it's something he back to and maybe even exceed. I know we've talked about some of the touchdown numbers, maybe starting with the number 3 there with 30 plus, but I'm going to go at least with 30 touchdowns here. And because if he passes for 30 touchdowns with hopefully the improved defense, hopefully with a marginally improved offensive line, that spells really good things for the Seahawks.
I'm going to start with Geno Smith for my predictions here. And this should not be viewed as necessarily a bold take either, because Geno Smith was above 70% completion rate for a large chunk of that 2022 season. I think he's going to flirt with 70% again in 2024. I just look at the way Ryan Grubb allows the scheme to get the football out of his quarterback's hands, a lot of high percentage throws, even the ones that are 15, 20 yards downfield. Geno Smith is very efficient with those throws anyway. I just think that with the weapons that they've got, this scheme there's going to be a lot of easy completions that are going to be schemed up by Ryan Grubb. So I think he's going to flirt and get very close to that 70% mark. And if he's throwing 70% completion rate, if he's around 30 or more touchdown passes, the Seahawks should feel pretty good about their chances of getting back to the playoffs, maybe even competing for an NFC West championship in 2024. Quarterback isn't the only position, though, Nick. So we've got plenty of other stuff we got to dive into when we're talking predictions for this offense that's got pretty high expectations this season.
Yeah, my next prediction is in the run game, and this pick might be just about as risky as wearing a scarf and ordering a pumpkin spice latte in October, which is like the 0 risk out of 100. And that is Kenneth Walker getting back to 1,000 yards. He missed it by about, I don't remember exactly what the number was, but he just missed it last year. He had 1,050 in his rookie year, so right around there. I'm not going to go crazy with like 1,200 yards because I do think there's a workload there to be had. There's some carries to be had for Zach Charbonnet. Just how the offense is configured, there might be more of a passing attack than recent years. So I'm not going to go nuts with Derrick Henry kind of numbers for Kenneth Walker, but certainly a return to the 1,000-yard mark for Ken Walker. And again, like we've mentioned, these things kind of have just symbiotic relationships with other part of the offense. That probably means the offensive line is improved. That probably means they're holding some leads if they're running the ball more. So again, another really good sign would be for Ken Walker to get back to 1,000 yards.
I've been on the JSN train basically since the first part of May, the first time we got to see the Seahawks on the practice field of this offseason, and just seeing how he had progressed and what Ryan Grubb was doing with him in this offense. And we've seen it carry over into game action. I know it's a preseason game, but that 29-yard reception on a slot fade. Look, Geno Smith can make those throws to Jackson Smith and Jigba with a blindfold on. That is how good these two have become and where their chemistry is at. So I am all in on this being JSN season. Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to get 90-plus receptions this year in his sophomore season. He's going to lead the team at catches. So I expect a big season for the former Ohio State star, and I think he's going to be trending towards becoming a star in the NFL for the Seahawks. That torch is going to start getting passed from Tyler Lockett to him, and I just think a big season is incoming for JSN. This offense is catered so well to his strengths, and Ryan Grubb, he's actually getting him downfield some. I think that's going to carry over to the regular season. A lot of targets for Jackson Smith and Jigba. He is going to put up big catch numbers this season for the Seahawks. As far as my next prediction here, I'm going to go to the offensive line, and this is the one that some of our listeners are going to say is bold. I don't think it is, though, based on what I've seen at training camp and a little bit we got to watch Charles Cross play this preseason. This is a player that I think needed a little bit of a push from a different coach, and I think Scott Huff is going to get the best out of Charles Cross. And, oh, by the way, he's still a young player. I mean, when he came into the league, he was 21. He's 23 years old. It's not like Charles Cross came in as an old rookie. This guy was one of the few young rookies that came in the league a couple years ago. He was still building his body. Watching him dominate in one-on-ones and what he's been able to do in team sessions, the preseason action we've seen, he's been very clean. He's getting after in the run game. I'm going to go bold here. I think Charles Cross is going to give up fewer than 4 sacks, and I think he's a second-team All-Pro selection. I think that is going to be a big part of this offense getting back to where it belongs in terms of meeting expectations. If you can get a really good season, a third year from Charles Cross, it sets him up for a big extension. I think the Seahawks have to sign that check for a franchise left tackle. I think he's going to start playing to that level this season.
Man, if they can get like a Seahawks era Dwayne Brown out of Charles Cross, I'll be ecstatic for that. So that's kind of where I'm visualizing that going. For my last individual one, before we get to team ones, I'm going to go with one that's going a bit bolder, I'd say, but he's already done it. I'm going to go DK Metcalf breaks his own single season receiving yards record. So that he set that in 2020 with 1,303 receiving yards. Corbin, if you look at like the first team All-Pro receivers from last year, all those guys pretty much broke that record themselves. And, obviously it's different for the franchise, but, the CeeDee Lambs of the world, those guys, Justin Jeffersons, those guys are going way past that mark. So at one side, yes, it's a bit bold because he's breaking his own single season franchise record. But on the other end, the standard of the NFL, you can get to the 1,500 yard mark and obviously be a first team All-Pro. So that could, this him breaking a record could also lean into perhaps DK Metcalf's first All-Pro selection of the first team variety. I'm not going to go that far quite yet, but just with, again, like Geno Smith being locked in for 30 touchdowns, like I've been predicting, I think that will lead to a lot of yards. And again, I'm way probably overreacting to 5 snaps in the preseason between Geno Smith and DK Metcalf, but I was all in after seeing that first drive between them two. And I do expect JSN. I do expect this both could happen, where JSN has 90 plus catches and DK Metcalf breaks his own receiving yards record. Both of those things could happen if things get wild in the passing game. But I think this offense is really set up for an explosive passing attack.
Yeah, let's get to our team prediction, because this is a team game, and the individuals are the ones that make it happen, but it's a team game. And so for me, I look at this Seahawks offense, and to me, the biggest thing that is going to improve for this football team from last year is the situational football. I'm basing that off what I've seen at training camp, what I've seen in the preseason games. This is a team that I think is destined to be much more efficient in the red zone and on third down. And I think there's 2 reasons for that. One, I don't know the offensive line is going to be a million times better, but I think it's going to be at least marginally better than last year's group, and that's going to help, certainly. And I think it's the Ryan Grubb effect, particularly when you're talking the third down conversions. Ryan Grubb at Washington, they were as good as any team in the country at extending drives. Ryan Grubb is going to know how to scheme up and get those first downs. I think they're going to be more efficient in the red zone. So I think they are a top 15 team in both those after being near the bottom of the league in both those metrics last year, which is going to, in turn, make this a much more dynamic offense by sustaining and finishing drives.
And I'm going to go with the most important stat in all of football, points. I'm going to go with the Seahawks score at least 24 points per game, which they have not done since 2020. And 24.0 points per game would have ranked, I believe, 8th in the NFL last year. So going from 17th in the NFL last year to top 8, that would be quite a leap. But given everything we've talked about, I mean, I don't think this is some crazy homer, rose-colored glasses or blue-colored glasses or whatever it is with us. I truly think with the offense that's being set up by Ryan Grubb, what we've seen in the preseason, Geno Smith, further developing as one of the more accurate quarterbacks in the NFL, the insane talent and all of the weapons he has, I think this all can lead to a 24-point per game offense, which would be a top 10 scoring offense, which absolutely could happen. And again, if the Seahawks can get there, oh my gosh, I mean, there's, playoffs, getting into the playoffs would be the bare minimum, I would say.
Playoffs?
I know it's August still.
It's August, and we're already busting out the Jim Morris Sr. clip. It is what it is. You'll hear that a lot this season. But anyway, we've got some defense to talk, so we're going to get to that coming up next, continuing our predictions on the defensive side of the football, which honestly, that is a side of the football that is going to be more important for this team to get back to the playoffs and potentially compete for a division championship. It needs to be that much better. That's why you bring in a guy like Mike Macdonald. We're going to get to the predictions on that side of the football coming up next year on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy and also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Whether it's superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, windshield wiper fluid, whatever you're into, whether it's speed, power, style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time and your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined for today's show by my co-host, Nick Lee, and a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s that are tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. It is prediction time. We are almost to the regular season for 2024. So Nick and I, we've got to go bold. We've got to dish out our takes here coming off the crystal ball. We just talked offense. But at the end of the day, for this team to really get where Mike Macdonald and John Schneider want them to go, back competing for championships, they've got to have dramatic improvements on the defensive side of the football. That's why you hire a defensive wonderkin like Mike Macdonald to take over as your new coach. You need to improve that 25th ranked scoring defense and just be better in all phases on that side of the ball. So as far as predictions go, Nick, again, giving you the mic here first, what's your first prediction for the defensive side of the football for the Seahawks in 2024?
Well, I'm squarely on the Boye Mafe hype train. I mean, it was a really fun year last year. 9 sacks, just barely missed double digits. I do think he gets over the edge this year. No pun intended. Maybe it was intended for edge there, but I think Boye Mafe does get to double-digit sacks this year. The Seahawks have not had a double-digit sack individual season since 2018. It's been way too long, and with a guy like Mike Macdonald at the helm, you'd like to think that the drought would finally end. This is one of the more annoying droughts for me, especially that year where I think it was Rasheem Green led the team with 4 sacks. That was 2019 or whenever that was. Oh my gosh, that was brutal. So I'm hoping that this is a sign of things to come, where a guy like Boye Mafe, who takes that another step, he took a great step last year in development. If he can take that extra step, especially, unfortunately, with maybe a brief absence of Uchenna Nwosu, that seemed to help him blossom last year. I think he gets over the hump again and gets to double digits. I'm not going to go crazy like 15, but at least 10 and a half, 11. That would be solid, next step for Boye Mafe.
I'm glad that you brought up that 2019 season. That was what nightmares were made of.
Are you, though?
Pass rushing numbers. That is almost as bad as that 2017 season where the Seahawks didn't have a running back with over 250 rushing yards. That's what keeps me up at night, when you can't run the ball. But I digress. Anyway, for my first prediction on the defensive side of the football, look, I am all in on the young duo the Seahawks have at cornerback right now. Devin Witherspoon, Tyreke Woolen. I think in this scheme that they are going to be put in position to make more plays on the football. Tyreke Woolen looks every bit as good, if not better, than what he did 2 years ago. He had injuries last season. That really impacted his play, and his coverage numbers were still not bad. He just didn't have the interception numbers. But I actually think this year, when you look at Witherspoon and Woolen, this is going to be viewed as bold, but I think they're going to combine for 10 interceptions this year. I really think that these two guys are going to get their hands on the football a lot. They're going to be the key engines that get this defense playing at a higher level. They are going to be disruptive, get their hands on the football, and maybe 1 or 2 of those get returned for touchdowns too, to put some points on the scoreboard. But I just think we are going to see a lot of picks between these two as they become one of the top, if not the top, young cornerback duo in the National Football League.
Well, I'll go with my one for Devin Witherspoon going off of that. With that, I'm going to go Devin Witherspoon gets first-team All-Pro. And that, in some circles, might not be that crazy of a prediction, but I think this year, last year he burst onto the scene. He was one of the more exciting defensive rookies in the NFL. Somehow finished outside of the top 1 in Defensive Rookie of the Year. And I think this year it's going to be a statement, especially with how, I feel like he's Mike Macdonald has been that meme of that kid who's like his veins popping out and he's sitting there about not wanting to just completely explode gushing over Devin Witherspoon. Like, he doesn't want to give it too much, but I truly think this is going to be a statement year for Devin Witherspoon, establishing himself not just as one of the best young corners in the NFL, one of the best cornerbacks, period, in the league today. And I think he'll make that statement this year with a first-team All-Pro nod.
And speaking of the way that Mike Macdonald carries himself in press conferences, that is a perfect segue into my second prediction here, because there may not be a player in Seattle's roster that he has been more hesitant to give compliments to than Tyrese Knight, the rookie out of UTEP. And I think some of it is because Mike Macdonald, this is his position. He's a linebacker coach. I am not going to get your head filled up, and I'm not going to make you have that big head syndrome going on. I'm not going to let you know that I think you're making progress. And I feel like he's kind of been pushing buttons the last few weeks when he's been asked about Tyrese Knight. Well, he's making a lot of tackles, but now we got to get to this. It's almost like he was challenging his rookie, saying, look, I want to play you at some point this year. I want to get you on the field. Can you force that issue? Force me to play you? And I think it's going to happen at some time, whether it's because of an injury. We know Jerome Baker's been banged up pretty much most of the time he's been with the Seahawks. There was even an injury for Dodson as well. It feels like at some point that Tyrese Knight is going to get that opportunity to get some snaps on defense. And if he runs with those snaps, which I think he's going to be able to do, this is a very talented player that is a playmaker. He gets hands on ball carriers. And when he does, he doesn't miss tackles. And he's got instincts galore. He's still needing some polish, but you've seen the way he handles screens, for example. This guy really understands the game. I'm saying 60-plus tackles, and I think he starts at least 8 games this year, whether it's because of injuries or because he just gets in the lineup and plays well, and then Mike Macdonald says, well, you're rookie, 4 years under contract. We're just going to let you run, kid. I think Tyreke Smith is going to get his opportunities this year, and he's going to make some plays for the Seahawks. And maybe still their biggest position of question here, both short and long-term at linebacker.
Well, I might do you one better here, Corbin. And my prediction involves Tyreke Smith and Terrell Dodson. I'm going to say they combine for 200 tackles. And that is quite bold, I know. And unfortunately,
spicy meatball.
Spicy, which I like spicy food, so I'm okay with that. I order a 3 at the curry place. 3 out of 5, I say, not 3 out of 10. I'm going to go with these two. Unfortunately, it's a lot to do with. I have questions about Jerome Baker and his durability. I do. I have true questions about that. Even if he can get back, what does that look like? And so I see Terrell Dodson getting his if he stays healthy in the in the 130 range, 120 range. If he plays all year and plays all 17 games as an off-ball linebacker and plays to his ability, I think he can get to that number. And then, if he doesn't start the year as a starter, or at least, in the first few weeks, I do think Tyreke Smith will get enough snaps to get to the 60, 70 tackle range moving down the line. Because, we got to remember, 17 games scheduled now, 100 tackles really isn't that hot of a take anymore. That should be fairly commonplace for a quality off-ball linebacker. So Terrell Dodson plus Tyreke Smith, averaging 100 tackles apiece, so 120, 120 to 80, 130 to 70, that kind of range, or maybe even 140 to 60 if Terrell Dodson goes nuts. Something along those lines. I think those two are going to be playing a lot.
I'm not going to go as far, continuing to talk rookies, I'm not going to go as far as saying Byron Murphy II wins Rookie of the Year, because I don't know that he's going to have the sack production, and whether it's fair or not, that has been such a big component about who wins Defensive Rookie of the Year. It's either interceptions or sacks. Like, those are your money stats. That's what you get paid for. That's what you win awards for. I don't know that Byron Murphy II is going to get enough sacks to win that award, but that does not mean I don't think he's going to be effective. In fact, I'm going to go as far as saying that he gets 5 sacks and 10 tackles for loss. I do think Byron Murphy II will be starting sooner rather than later. The fact that the Seahawks were already safeguarding him in preseason games after a drive or two and getting him off the field, just how important this kid already is to their short-term and long-term success on that side of the football. I think he's going to be a menace. Offensive lines are going to already hate having to block this guy. And I've made this comparison a few times. Look, I see John Randall 2.0. That is the comp for me when I watch Byron Murphy II. I just see very similar skill set. Just the way that he plays the game. Maybe not as much of a trash talker. John Randall was a pretty big trash talker. I've not seen that yet from Byron Murphy II, but in terms of how he plays, I see that kind of an impact early where he's able to get some pressures, get 5 sacks, and able to get in the backfield for double-digit tackles for loss. So I think a game-changing rookie season from Byron Murphy II, and he will just be scratching the surface of what he's capable of doing. I think he'll get a lot more sacks down the line. And as far as my team prediction on defense, going off that 5 sacks, I think the Seahawks, here's the thing last year, Nick, they actually had a decent total for sacks. They were in the upper 40s. I think with Mike Macdonald as the coordinator, or the head coach, but coordinating this defense, he's the one that's calling the plays. I think this is a top 3 team in sacks this year. I think with the way they're going to be blitzing guys from different areas of the field, the sim pressures, how aggressive they are, I think this is a top 3 sack total team in the NFL in 2024.
Whew, okay, there's your ghost pepper jalapeno popper there for that. I'll take that. So my last one, my team one, is they're going to allow under 21 points per game, which they have not done since 2017, which is wild to think about, especially with, here we are now a decade removed truly from the peak powers of Legion of Boom. 21 points per game now it would be really solid. I believe last year 21.0 would have ranked 12th in the league. So if in my predictions, you have a top 8 scoring offense and a top 12 scoring defense, I'm not a calculus teacher, but that sounds like that's adding up to a nice season for the Seahawks. And, last year and the year before, they averaged 23.6 points allowed exactly last 2 seasons. I would love, 2.5+ points shaved off of that per game. So not necessarily crazy spicy, but certainly just a general gradual improvement in the points per game department on both offense and defense is what I'm getting at with these predictions for offense and defense.
I'm going to cap the show off with one special teams one just because, look, I'm the lead host of this show and I can do what I want. My special teams hot take. D. Williams is going to return a punt and a kickoff for a touchdown this season. I'm making that bold pick.
Never mind. There's your spicy peppers.
This kid is special. He is dynamic. You saw it in the preseason. I just think D. Williams is going to make some major noise, and that's why he is on the roster, because this guy can be that kind of a game changer, returning kicks and punts. I think he's going to make it happen and be the most effective rookie returner they've had since Tyler Lockett way back in 2015. So we'll leave you with that tasty takeaway here in our predictions piece. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Nick at NickLee51. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back on Monday, it is going to be game week. Time to pull back the curtain and take a first look at Bo Nix, Sean Payton, and the Denver Broncos leading up to Week 1. We can't wait. It is game week, baby. Coming up on Monday. Make sure that you're listening in and enjoy your last weekend off before the regular season. Go Hawks.